Something in your world is about to shift so abruptly that ignoring it will no longer be an option. And even if you have tried to convince yourself that everything is fine, that nothing significant is building, there is a deeper part of you that already knows a threshold is about to be crossed. Because in exactly 2 days, on Tuesday, May 5th, a surge of energy will ripple through the collective mind. And while many will be caught completely off guard, you are here for a reason, because this is not a subtle moment. This is not a quiet adjustment in the background of your life. This is a rupture, a release, a point where everything that has been held back begins to push forward all at once. And what makes this even more intense is that you have already been feeling it without fully understanding why. The weight in your chest during certain conversations, the sense that something unspoken is hovering just beneath the surface, the way certain thoughts keep circling back no matter how much you try to distract yourself. And that is because pressure has been accumulating for weeks, silently, steadily building beneath your awareness, until now, and what you are sensing is not random. It is the early signal of a moment that cannot be delayed any longer. Because Mercury, the force that governs thought, speech, and perception, is about to form a square with Pluto, the force that rules what is hidden, suppressed, and psychologically buried. And when these two energies meet in tension, the result is never gentle. It is confrontational. It is exposing. It is the kind of moment where what has been avoided demands to be seen, and what has been concealed begins to surface with undeniable intensity. And if you have recently noticed thoughts appearing that feel intrusive, persistent, almost obsessive, especially around people, truths, or situations you thought you had already processed, there is a reason those thoughts are not leaving you alone. And that reason is directly tied to what is unfolding right now. But before you can understand that fully, you need to recognize why the next 48 hours carry so much weight. Because this is not just about a single day. This is the ignition point of a much larger process. What becomes visible on May 5th is only the beginning, and what follows requires awareness. Because if you are not prepared to face what rises to the surface, it can feel overwhelming, like being pulled into emotional depths you were not expecting to revisit. And that is why this particular Mercury-Pluto square is not like the others, because, yes, this alignment happens multiple times each year, and it is known for bringing intensity, suspicion, and uncomfortable conversations. But this one carries a different kind of gravity, and the reason is rooted in Pluto itself, because on May 6th, just 1 day later, Pluto stations retrograde, meaning it slows down to an almost complete stop in the sky. And when a planet like Pluto reaches that stillness, its influence does not pass lightly through your life. It saturates it. It lingers. It amplifies everything it touches. Imagine a moving light scanning across a dark room, briefly illuminating different corners, different details. But then imagine that light suddenly freezing in place, locking onto one exact point, holding its focus there without shifting. Everything within that beam becomes impossible to ignore. Every detail becomes visible. Every shadow disappears. And that is exactly the energetic condition you are stepping into. Pluto has slowed to a near standstill, concentrating its intensity, and Mercury is moving directly into that concentrated field, creating a moment where mental awareness collides with deep, unfiltered truth. And when that collision occurs, there is no containment. What has been hidden does not remain hidden. What has been internalized does not stay quiet. It emerges, it speaks. It reveals itself, whether you feel ready or not. And many people believe they can bypass moments like this by avoiding confrontation, by staying silent, by convincing themselves that if they do not engage, nothing will change. But this energy does not operate on avoidance. It is not something you can opt out of. It is a cycle that unfolds regardless of resistance, and that is why understanding what led to this moment matters. Because this did not appear suddenly, it is the culmination of everything that has been building throughout April. A month that for many felt heavy, obstructed, mentally exhausting, as if every attempt to move forward required more effort than usual, as if even simple conversations carried unexpected tension, and that experience was not imagined. It was the result of a series of planetary movements that created friction between impulse and limitation, because during April, several personal planets entered Aries, a sign associated with urgency, action, and direct expression. Mars moved into Aries on April 9th, followed by Mercury on April 14th, both bringing a desire to act quickly, to speak openly, to move without hesitation, but almost immediately. Those impulses encountered resistance in the form of Saturn, the planet that enforces boundaries, structure, and consequence. And between April 19th and April 20th, both Mars and Mercury formed exact conjunctions with Saturn in Aries, creating a dynamic where the drive to act was met with restriction, where the urge to speak was met with inhibition, producing a psychological state that felt like pressing forward while simultaneously being held back, like accelerating and stopping at the same time. And that internal contradiction is what has been building pressure within you, setting the stage for what is now about to be released. And as this tension reaches its peak, you begin to understand that what is coming next is not random. It is the inevitable result of everything that has been suppressed, finally demanding expression. And this is where the real shift begins. For longer than you probably want to admit, you have been living in that suspended space where something inside you was ready to move, ready to speak, ready to confront. And yet, every time you got close, something held you back, and that tension has not been subtle. It has been building quietly in the background of your days, showing up as unfinished thoughts, conversations you rehearsed, but never had, decisions you kept postponing, and a kind of mental pressure that never fully released, almost like your mind has been circling the same point over and over without finding an exit. And what you may not have realized is that this was not indecision. It was containment. It was energy being compressed without an outlet. And that compression has been increasing week after week until now, because on May 5th, Mercury finally moves out of that slow, grounded rhythm it has been held in and reaches the exact degree where it forms a square to Pluto in Aquarius, both meeting at 5 degrees. And that precise alignment is the moment the internal barrier gives way. It is the point where everything that has been pushed down, filtered, edited, or silenced throughout April begins to surge upward all at once. Not in a controlled release, but in a forceful eruption that demands attention. And if you have been feeling like your mind has not been entirely your own lately, like certain thoughts have been arriving uninvited and refusing to leave, this is not something you imagined. This is the direct manifestation of Mercury interacting with Pluto at a level that is far more invasive than most people are prepared for, because this kind of energy does not gently suggest. It penetrates it, fixates, it pulls your awareness into depths you may not have intended to explore. And when Pluto is nearly motionless in the sky, preparing to station retrograde, that influence does not pass quickly. It lingers, it intensifies, it saturates your mental space in a way that can feel consuming, and you may have already begun to notice the signs, thoughts that feel unusually intense, questions that keep resurfacing, suspicions that seem to carry a weight that makes them hard to dismiss, and these may be directed toward people in your life, situations that no longer feel clear, or even parts of your own behavior that you have not fully examined before. And what is happening here is that Mercury is moving through territory that Pluto governs, a psychological landscape defined by secrets, by what is hidden beneath appearances, by everything that has been intentionally left unspoken. And under this influence, your mind begins to operate differently. You start to observe more closely, to analyze more deeply, to notice subtle inconsistencies that previously went overlooked. You replay interactions, you pick up on tone shifts, pauses, energy changes that you cannot logically explain but cannot ignore either. And for some of you, this has already activated a kind of investigative mindset where you feel compelled to connect pieces of information to search for meaning beneath the surface, to understand what is really going on beyond what is being presented. And this is one of the most powerful aspects of Mercury-Pluto. The ability to see through illusion, to detect manipulation, to uncover what has been deliberately concealed, it sharpens perception to a level where very little escapes your awareness. But within that heightened perception lies a significant risk, because not everything that feels true under this influence is grounded in reality. Not every persistent thought is guidance, and not every suspicion reflects an actual hidden truth. Sometimes this same energy can turn inward and distort perception, amplifying fear, creating narratives that feel convincing but are built on incomplete information, leading you to interpret neutral situations as threatening or to see patterns where none exist. And this is where many people lose their grounding. They become so focused on uncovering something that they begin to generate conclusions prematurely. They cross boundaries in pursuit of certainty. They justify actions that would not normally align with their values because they feel driven by the need to know. And this is why awareness is critical right now. Because if your mind has been moving rapidly, if your thoughts feel intrusive, repetitive, almost impossible to shut off, you need to pause and question the source. Ask yourself whether what you are experiencing is genuine intuitive insight or whether it is the mind becoming entangled in its own intensity. Ask whether you are seeing clearly or whether fear is shaping the narrative, because as Tuesday arrives, that distinction becomes even more difficult to maintain, and this is where the situation escalates. Because the alignment on May 5th is not subtle in its external expression. What has been hidden does not gradually reveal itself, it emerges abruptly. Often in ways that feel overwhelming information, surfaces without warning. Conversations take unexpected turns, disclosures happen that cannot be reversed, and this can manifest in many forms. It may be a confession that someone can no longer contain, a piece of evidence that suddenly becomes visible, a message that confirms what you have been sensing but could not prove, or a discussion that moves into territory you never anticipated entering. And this is because Pluto governs everything we bury, everything tied to shame, power control, and unresolved emotional material, while Mercury acts as the channel through which information becomes conscious. So when these two forces collide in tension, what has been locked away is no longer protected. It is brought into awareness with intensity, like something being pulled from a sealed space into full visibility. And for some of you, this will play out in your external world. You will learn something about another person that alters your perception of them in a fundamental way. It may involve a partner, a friend, a colleague, or a family member. And what you discover may challenge the image you had constructed, revealing aspects that were previously hidden, causing a shift that cannot be undone, while for others, the impact will be internal. A realization that forms within you about patterns you have repeated, truths you have avoided, or behaviors you have justified. And this kind of awareness can be just as intense because it removes the ability to remain in denial. It forces you to confront something about yourself that you can no longer ignore. And as this realization takes hold, you begin to understand that this moment is not simply about exposure, it is about transformation. And what comes next depends entirely on how you choose to face what has been revealed. There is a moment coming where you will no longer be able to look away from what you have been quietly tolerating. And for some of you, that moment will arrive as a recognition so sharp it feels like it cuts straight through years of denial. It may be the sudden clarity that a relationship you have been trying to preserve has actually been draining you for far longer than you admitted. Or it may be the uncomfortable realization that the life you have been building does not reflect what you truly want. That somewhere along the way you began negotiating against your own desires, convincing yourself to accept less. To stay small, to remain silent about what you knew deep down was not aligned. And when that truth finally surfaces, it does not arrive gently. It arrives with force, disrupting the version of reality you had constructed to feel safe. And in that first impact, it can feel devastating because it dismantles the illusion that everything was under control. It removes the comfort of not knowing. It replaces hope with clarity. And clarity is not always easy to hold, but what you need to understand is that this collapse is not a failure. It is a necessary correction, because anything built on avoidance will eventually demand to be rebuilt. Anything rooted in distortion cannot sustain you long term, and while it may feel like something is being taken from you in that moment, what is actually happening is that you are being separated from what was never truly supporting you, because healing cannot begin where truth is denied. And power cannot be claimed while you continue to identify with a version of yourself that remains restricted by fear. And this is why the truth that emerges on Tuesday is not here to harm you. It is here to liberate you, even if the path to that freedom begins with discomfort. And as that first wave of exposure settles, a second wave begins to rise. One that shifts from what is revealed into how it is expressed, because under this alignment, communication itself changes in tone, in intensity, in purpose. Normally, there is a natural tendency to soften what we say, to consider how our words will land, to prioritize harmony over confrontation. But on May 5th, that restraint weakens. Mercury in Taurus would prefer to move slowly, to choose language carefully, to remain grounded and composed. But Pluto in Aquarius does not operate within those limits. It is driven by the need to assert influence, to expose dynamics of control, to shift power. And when these two forces collide, communication is no longer centered on mutual understanding. It becomes charged, it becomes strategic. It becomes something that can either reveal truth constructively or deploy it in a way that creates harm. And you may find yourself speaking with a level of directness that surprises you, expressing thoughts you have held back for months, allowing emotions to surface without the usual filter. And in some cases, those words may carry more weight than you intended. They may land more sharply than expected, and this is not a one-sided experience. Someone else in your life may also reach a point where they can no longer contain what they have been holding in, and what they say may shift your perception of them in an instant. It could be a partner admitting something they have concealed, a friend finally expressing resentment that has been building beneath the surface, or a colleague exposing dynamics that reveal manipulation or imbalance within a shared environment. And what makes this particularly complex is that this energy does not just bring truth forward. It intensifies how that truth is delivered. It can turn words into instruments of pressure, tools used to influence, to control, to assert dominance within a conversation. And this is where awareness becomes essential, because not everyone will handle this energy with integrity. Some will attempt to manipulate narratives, to distort facts, to use emotional leverage to achieve their desired outcome. And without clarity, it is easy to become entangled in those dynamics, either by adopting similar behaviors or by becoming the target of them. And this is why the distinction you carry into Tuesday matters. Truth expressed without consideration can become destructive. Honesty delivered without awareness can cause unnecessary harm. And while this moment invites you to speak, it also asks you to remain conscious of how you speak, to ensure that what you communicate aligns with your values, rather than being driven purely by intensity. And as this day unfolds, many people will assume that once the confrontation has happened, once the truth has been revealed, the experience is complete. But that is only the surface layer of what is actually beginning, because less than a day later, on May 6th, Pluto shifts direction and stations retrograde at 5 degrees and 30 minutes in Aquarius. And this marks the transition from external exposure into internal processing. And this phase will extend until October 15th, 2026, creating a period of 5 months where the focus turns inward, where instead of sudden revelations, you are asked to examine what those revelations mean for you, how they reflect your patterns, your choices, your boundaries, and your relationship to power itself. And this is where the deeper work begins. Because what surfaced on May 5th is not something to simply acknowledge and move past. It becomes the central theme you are meant to engage with over the coming months. If a relationship dynamic was revealed as unhealthy, this is the period where you begin to disentangle yourself from it, not just externally, but emotionally. If you recognized a pattern of compromising your own needs, this is where you confront that pattern and begin the process of changing it. If you became aware of imbalance or corruption in your environment, this is where you decide whether you continue to participate in it or choose a different direction. And this distinction is what separates transformation from stagnation, because insight alone does not create change. It is the willingness to act on that insight consistently that reshapes your reality, and Pluto retrograde does not rush this process. It asks you to sit with it, to examine it from multiple angles, to identify where your power has been placed outside of yourself, where you have allowed external forces to dictate your sense of control, and where you may have been unconsciously reinforcing the very dynamics you wish to escape. And as these questions begin to surface within you, you start to recognize that this period is not just about what happened. It is about what you choose to do with what has been revealed. And that choice is what defines everything that follows. There is a question that is about to follow you into every quiet corner of your life. And it is not a comfortable one. It is not something you can answer quickly and move on from. It is the kind of question that settles into your body and waits, asking you again and again where you are still holding on to patterns, people, or situations that are slowly draining you. And over the next 5 months, you are not going to be able to escape that reflection, because it will show up when you are alone, when there is no distraction left, when the noise fades and all that remains is the truth you have been avoiding. And this is where the real transformation begins, not in the moment of revelation, but in the long stretch of time that follows, where you are asked to sit with what you now know and decide what you are going to do about it. And you need to understand something very clearly. This is not an experience you can simply choose to bypass. There is no option to step outside of this process. The only decision available to you is whether you engage with it consciously or allow it to unfold in a way that catches you off guard. Because if you turn away from what is being shown to you, if you dismiss it, minimize it, or convince yourself that it is easier to maintain the illusion than to face the truth that energy does not disappear. It does not dissolve on its own. It lingers. It deepens. It begins to affect you in ways that are far more subtle and far more persistent. It moves into your thoughts, creating loops of worry and doubt. It enters your emotional state, generating unease that you cannot quite explain. It can even begin to express itself physically through tension fatigue or symptoms that seem disconnected from any clear cause. And in your relationships, it creates a distance that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. A quiet build-up of resentment that sits beneath the surface until it eventually demands attention. And the longer you avoid addressing what has been revealed, the more intense it becomes, because this kind of energy does not weaken over time. It waits, it accumulates, and when it finally reaches a point where it can no longer be contained, the release is far more disruptive than it would have been if you had chosen to engage with it earlier. And this is where many people make the mistake of convincing themselves that what they saw was not real, that what they felt was exaggerated, that preserving stability is more important than confronting discomfort. And they spend these 5 months justifying, rationalizing, finding ways to explain away what they know deep down is true. And then, as October arrives and Pluto shifts direction again, bringing that energy back outward, they are faced with the realization that nothing has changed, that they are standing in the same place they were before. Only now, the weight of everything they avoided has grown heavier, more complex, more difficult to untangle. And this is why it matters how you respond now, because this is not just a moment, it is an opportunity. And whether it becomes a turning point or a repetition depends entirely on your willingness to face what is coming. And as you move into this period, there are ways to navigate it with awareness, ways to move through the intensity without losing yourself in it. And the first step is to ground yourself before everything begins to shift, to take time to reconnect with your own center, whether that means sitting in stillness, writing out your thoughts, or placing yourself in an environment that helps you feel stable and present, because when the wave of realization comes, you need to be anchored in something real, not carried away by the emotional surge that follows. And, as Tuesday approaches it, is important to release the need to predict exactly what will happen, to remain open to the possibility that what unfolds may not align with your expectations, because this energy often reveals what you were not looking for, and the more flexible you are, the easier it becomes to adapt to what is being shown. And within the conversations that arise, there is a powerful invitation to listen deeply, not just to the words being spoken, but to the spaces between them, to the tone, the pauses, the underlying emotion. Because often the most important information is not delivered directly. It is felt, it is implied. It is revealed through what is not being said as much as what is. And as truths come into your awareness, there is also a responsibility in how you handle them, because it can be tempting to react immediately, to use what you have discovered as a way to confront, to defend, or to assert control. But there is wisdom in pausing, in allowing yourself to fully understand what you are seeing before deciding how to respond. Because once something is expressed, it cannot be taken back. And the way you choose to communicate in this moment shapes what follows. And as the days pass and Pluto moves into its retrograde phase, the focus shifts from what has been revealed to what you are going to do with it. This is where you begin to actively dismantle patterns that no longer serve you, to step away from situations that are not aligned with your well-being, to reclaim parts of yourself that have been suppressed or compromised. And this is not always an easy process. It requires consistency, honesty, and a willingness to face discomfort repeatedly. But it is also where the most meaningful change occurs, and through it all, there is a deeper process unfolding that asks you to trust that what is being revealed is not happening to harm you, even when it feels overwhelming, even when it disrupts what you thought was stable, because at its core, this is about freeing you from what has been limiting you. And as you move through this threshold, you begin to see that May 5th is not just a date, it is a crossing point. A moment where you step from one version of yourself into another, and the person you become on the other side is shaped entirely by how you choose to meet this experience. Because some will move through this and emerge with a deeper sense of clarity, having faced what they needed to face, and made decisions that align with who they truly are, while others will carry the weight of resistance, remembering this time as something that disrupted them without recognizing that it was also offering them a chance to change. And the difference between those two outcomes is not the intensity of what happened. It is the willingness to engage with it fully. And that is the choice that now stands in front of you. At the center of everything that is about to unfold, there is one defining factor that separates those who transform from those who remain exactly where they are, and it comes down to a single internal decision. Whether you are willing to face what is being revealed without turning away, willing to speak what you know is true even when your voice shakes, willing to release what has already outlived its place in your life even when holding on feels easier than letting go. Because what this moment is offering you is not comfort, it is evolution. And that evolution follows a law that cannot be bypassed, the cycle of ending and beginning the process where something must close in order for something else to emerge. And this is the essence of Pluto. It does not negotiate with stagnation, It does not allow you to carry the old version of yourself into a space that requires something new. It asks for a shedding, a stripping away of identities, attachments, and illusions that you have used to define yourself. And that process can feel like loss if you are resisting it. But it is actually a transition, a movement from one state of being into another that is more aligned with who you are becoming. And this is why the truth that surfaces on Tuesday carries such intensity, because it is not simply information. It is a catalyst. It is designed to break through the structures you have built around yourself, the narratives you have relied on, the roles you have played to maintain a sense of stability. And when those structures begin to crack, it can feel disorienting. It can feel like the ground beneath you is no longer steady, like everything you thought you understood is shifting all at once. And in that moment, it is natural to want to retreat, to try to rebuild the same framework, to restore what felt familiar. But this is where your willingness becomes everything. Because if you try to return to what was, you delay the very transformation that is trying to take place. And if you allow yourself to move through the discomfort, to sit with the uncertainty, to let the old dissolve without rushing to replace it, you create space for something far more authentic to take form. And this is not a gentle process. It is not meant to be growth. At this level requires friction. It requires confrontation with parts of yourself and your life that you have not fully acknowledged. It requires honesty that goes beyond surface-level awareness. And yes, there may be moments where it feels like everything is unraveling, like the life you knew is coming apart piece by piece. But what is actually happening is a clearing, a removal of what was never meant to last. And beyond that clearing, there is something else waiting. Something that feels more stable because it is built on truth. Something that feels more aligned because it reflects your actual desires rather than the ones you thought you were supposed to have. And as you move through this process, you begin to notice a shift, a gradual return of clarity, a sense that you are no longer navigating through confusion, but through awareness. And that awareness brings with it a different kind of strength, one that is not dependent on external validation or temporary certainty, but rooted in your ability to see clearly and act accordingly. And over the course of the 5 months that follow this shift, deepens. It becomes integrated into how you think, how you relate, how you make decisions, until eventually you look back and recognize that you are not the same person who stood at the beginning of this threshold. You are more grounded, more honest with yourself, more aligned with what truly matters to you. And that is the version of you that this moment is pointing toward, the one that exists beyond the illusions, beyond the compromises, beyond the fear of change. And the only question that remains is whether you are ready to meet that version of yourself. Because in 2 days, the process begins regardless. The invitation will be placed directly in front of you. And how you respond will shape everything that follows. And if you have stayed with this message until now, there is a reason for that. There is something within you that recognizes the significance of this moment. And as you move forward, I invite you to stay connected to that awareness, to reflect on what resonates. And if this message has spoken to you, consider sharing your experience or perspective, and continue engaging with this space for more insights as you navigate what comes next.